For centuries, knowledge has been hidden in plain sight across the sands of time. Whispers of lost civilizations, cryptic symbols, and forbidden histories have been erased or concealed. What if the truth was never lost, but hidden? Welcome to Eye of Ancient Mysteries, where the past speaks and the future listens. Sit back, open your mind, and prepare to uncover the untold secrets of our world. Let the journey begin now. What's the title? You might ask or think, my dear readers. For which author are readers not dear? And I, hearing or guessing your question, reply, what should I do? Am I guilty that my tireless contemporaries, the romantic poets in verse and prose, have already seized all other interesting titles? Corsairs, pirates, infidels, regenerates, and even vampires, who one after another stormed the reader generation or sneaked into the boudoirs of sentimental beauties in moonlight. My imagination is so full of all these living or dead monsters that I feel like I can still hear behind my back the vampire grinding his teeth, or see how, from the grave's whiteness of the devilish eye of the regenerate, the bloody pupil separates. Scared by these horrors, I too, even in jest, decided to frighten you, ladies and gentlemen. But since I am not endowed with the gloomy imagination of Lord Byron, nor with the vivid brush of Walter Scott, nor with the screeching pen of Mr. Darlinker and similar figures, and my muse herself is so capricious that she often laughs through tears and trembles with fear, I, yielding to her whim, let my imagination go blindly wherever it leads. For the justification of my title, I will only say that I wanted to give you something new, unprecedented, and as far as I remember, common werewolves have not yet frightened good people in the world of books. I could have invented something else instead of a werewolf or replaced it with a fierce robber, but everything new, as I already had the honor to explain to you, has been grabbed by others, and now in our bookstores, such large bands of robbers are entrenched. Not always branded, in any case not with the brand of genius, but always printed, that if mice and mold had not risen against them with their Santa Hermandad, decent people would have had no peace from them. I thought of writing these introductory words as a conversation between one of my friends and some of my enemies, but I was afraid that I would immediately be accused of imitation. And I admit, I didn't want to be declared an imitator. Let us create something of our own, my dear comrades on the paper and pen path, something of our own. I want to set a good example, so I will depict a previously unseen folk werewolf. In one village, dear readers, I hope you won't ask me what this village is called, in which province and district it is located. Be content with what I will tell you, and do not ask for more. And so, listen on. Once upon a time, there was an old man named Ermolai. Everyone knew that he washed with dew, collected various herbs, and wandered, constantly muttering something in his long white mustache, slept with his eyes open, and so on. What more? It means he's a sorcerer, and a wicked sorcerer. That's what they said about him in the village. I must say that the village was located next to a large, ancient forest, and Ermolai's house was on the very edge of it, almost in the forest. Ermolai was not married, but about 15 years before the time we meet him, he took in an orphan boy, who until then had been called the homeless Artyusha, and now, either out of respect for the sorcerer, or because of the boy's tall stature and strength, they began to call him Artyom Ermolaevich. No one knew or cared who his real father was, and even less interested in knowing. Artyom was a handsome young man, tall, sturdy, pale and rosy, in short, bursting with health. Indeed, what would it cost the sorcerer to raise his foster son? The villagers were convinced that he had nursed him with bat's milk, that fairies combed his unruly hair at night, and that his face was white and rosy, because the old man had washed him with March snow while whispering magical words. One thing the good villagers couldn't understand: why, having reborn, so to speak, Artyom from a sickly, pale boy into a healthy, red-cheeked young man, hadn't the old man taught him any sense or reason? Because Artyusha was as simple as they come thee. He couldn't put two proper words together, couldn't count to 100 without making a mistake, and didn't always answer correctly when asked which hand was his right or left. So Namar Veli he looked with his big gray eyes, so innocently he stared, and so awkwardly he stumbled when he had to run, that the village girls secretly mocked him and whispered to each other, "Handsome as a poppy flower, but as stupid as a stump." In the village he earned the nickname Gaping Carp, but they didn't say it out loud, only quietly behind the sorcerer's back, because they were afraid of offending him through his foster son. But still, many began to realize that the old sorcerer was aware of the villagers' mockery of his adopted son. Suddenly, the small livestock in the village started to disappear. One person's pair of sheep never returned from pasture, another's 3 or 4 goats, and a third lost all their lambs. Shepherds had often seen a large, enormous wolf suddenly springing out of the forest, grabbing 1 or 2 sheep, biting their throats, tossing them over his back, and, in the blink of an eye, carrying them off into the forest. No matter how they shouted or cursed, the wolf didn't even blink. No matter how much the dogs were set on him, they ran away with their tails between their legs, looking around fearfully. The villagers soon began to suspect that this was no ordinary wolf, but a werewolf. Then they realized something else. This werewolf was none other than Ermolai Parfentivich himself. There was nothing to be done. Everyone was afraid of the sorcerer, although, to be honest, he had never done anything bad to the village. But still, he was a sorcerer. How could they complain about him? Where would they find justice, when even the priest refused to curse him? To beat him, it would be a sin, even though he was a sorcerer. And besides, these matters smelled so much of public punishment by beating and banishment that who would dare raise a hand against him? And another thing, what if, after his death, he started coming out of his grave, not to catch sheep, but to hunt the people who had wronged him by prematurely sending him to the other world? No matter how much the villagers thought and discussed this issue in the village assembly. They came up with nothing. They had no choice but to throw up their hands, gnash their teeth, and pray to the saints for themselves and their flocks. In the same village lived a beautiful girl named Akolina Timofeevna. Her face was as rosy as an apple, her eyes fire, her eyebrows embroidered. In short, she was born with all the charms and graces of the beauties from the old Russian songs and tales. She never mocked the foolish Artyusha, and, on the contrary, she stood up for him in front of her friends, saying he was a fine young man. The clever girl had figured out that the old Ermolai was very rich and of such an age that he didn't have much longer to live, and that the only heir to his wealth would be Artyom Ermolaevich. She looked at Artyom so sweetly and spoke to him so tenderly when they met, "Hello, young man!" that he, as simple as he was, noticed her kindness. More and more often he would walk up to her, puffed up and proud, and start a conversation, not exactly an intelligent one, but still with words that pleased the girl and to which she readily responded. In short, Akolina Timofeevna soon gained Artyom's full trust. He began to stop by her more often and, licking his lips, would greet her with a silly laugh. "Hello, Akulia," while friendly tapping her white, rounded shoulder with his heavy hand, melting before her. Yes, he melted in the full sense of the word, because his cheeks would burn even more, his eyes grew duller and sillier, and his crimson lips could not close, and kept swelling and shining with moisture like a vodka-soaked cherry. The girl began seriously considering how to arrange her life, with the help of a wedding ring and a vow to marry Artyom and claim his future fortune. Finally, the wise villagers turned to her for help with their trouble. "You are the smartest, Akolina Timofeevna," they said, "and we know this your friend Artyom Ermolaevich is a bit of a fool, although he is the son of such a respectable man with a white beard. Help us, and we will reward you however we can. Our only request is this: ask him in such a way that we are absolutely sure whether a real wolf is killing our sheep, or, forgive us for saying this, Ermolai Parfentievich is turning into a werewolf and playing tricks on us." Akolina Timofeevna thought for a moment. Shaking her head in contemplation, she was afraid to anger the sorcerer, who knew everything happening in the world. But at the same time, the rewards tempted her. Who isn't tempted by rewards? Ask lawyers, ask judges, ask anyone. Everyone, if not with words, then with a look, will remind you of the old saying, "Even a saint can become too much for God." And Akolina Timofeevna, in this regard, was not a hardened sinner, nor was she an overly pious saint. She thought, and promised the villagers that she would take care of their problem. The next day, when she met Artyom, she was even more welcoming and affectionate towards him, and poor Artyom completely melted before her. His cheeks burned like fire. His lips became completely swollen. The little devil gently patted his cheek with her full fingers and said, "Artyusha, my dear, I'd like to tell you something, but I'm afraid your old man will hear. Where is he now? Who knows? He's wandering like a forest spirit through the woods, something about collecting bark for winter. Tell me, please, have you noticed anything strange about him? Honestly, no. But people are saying all sorts of things about him. That he is a sorcerer, that he wanders in the woods like a werewolf, and is drowning our sheep. Don't talk like that, my dear. You're scaring me with your words. Listen, my bright falcon, you won't lose anything if you follow him, and then tell me if the rumor going around the village is true. He loves you. He won't do anything to you. He loves me. But what will I gain? Well, you'll gain the fact that I'll love you even more. I'll marry you, and we'll live happily. Really? Then what should I do? Do this. Don't fall asleep at night and watch when your old man starts his magic. If he goes somewhere, follow him. Hide in some corner or behind some bush and keep your eyes open. Then you can tell me what you saw. Wow! That sounds scary! But when will I sleep? Later you'll sleep all you want, my dear. When I become your wife, you won't have to chop wood or carry water. I'll do everything for you while you relax by the stove and eat the ready-made meals. Fine! I'll follow him. But what if he beats me? Don't worry, he won't find out. And if something happens, I'll come and admit it was my idea. Well, that's fine. Just don't betray me. You? How could I? Go now, my dear. Goodbye then, my dear. No matter how simple-minded he might have been, Artem was not one of the fearful ones. He feared and respected his adoptive father, but whether it was due to his weak intellect or innate courage, he had no fear of the supernatural. Perhaps the old man, in raising him in blissful ignorance, had tried to protect him from any thoughts of magicians, evil spirits, and the like, to avoid suspicion towards himself and to prevent the boy from noticing things he needed to hide. Nightfall came. As usual, Artem went to bed early, wrapping himself up tightly, but he didn't sleep and listened carefully to whether the old man was asleep. The evening was dark. The old man tossed and turned in his bed, muttering something under his breath. But when the moonlight shone, Ermelag got up, dressed, took something from the chest next to his bed, and left the house without making a sound. At the same moment, Artem was already on his feet, threw on his cloak, and silently followed him out. Hidden in the brush, he traced the old man's steps, and when he saw him heading toward the forest, he followed, always staying in the shadows. Even the most naive person has some natural cleverness and uses it when they need to deceive someone stronger or more cunning than themselves. But let's leave the cleverness of the knave for now and see what Artem does next. He followed the old man all the way to the densest part of the forest, hiding behind fences, sneaking through bushes, and even crawling like a lizard when necessary. In the thick forest there was a clearing, and in the clearing a trembling poplar stump, nearly half the height of a person. The old magician headed straight toward it, and here is what Artem saw from his hiding place behind a nearby hazel bush. The moonlight shone directly onto the cut stump of the trembling poplar, and it seemed to Artem as though the stump was glowing and shining like silver. The old Ermola quietly circled the stump 3 times, murmuring a spell each time. In the sea of the ocean, on the island of Boyan, on the bare meadow, the moon lights the trembling poplar stump. Around the stump, a shaggy wolf circles, in his teeth all the horned cattle. Moon, moon, golden horns. Melt the bullets, blunt the knives, break the sticks, frighten beast and man, so that the gray wolf is not caught, and his warm coat is not skinned. The night was so quiet that Artem could hear every word clearly. After the incantation, the old magician faced the moon, drove a small copper-handled knife into the heart of the stump, and circled around it 3 times, so that on the 3rd time he fell with his head toward the side where the moonlight shone. As soon as he completed the 3rd turn, Artem looked and saw that the old man had vanished, and in his place stood a huge, terrifying gray wolf. The evil beast raised its snout, looked at the moon with its blood-red eyes, sniffed the air in all directions, howled with a terrifying sound, and ran out of the forest so fast that it soon vanished into the earth. All this time, Artem trembled with fear like a trembling leaf. His teeth chattered so quickly and hard that he could have crushed a quarter of a bushel of bulgur with them, and his lips, perhaps for the first time in his life, had pressed together, shriveled, and turned blue. But when the werewolf disappeared, he recovered and regained his composure, though it took quite some time. They say that stupidity is worse than evil, but that is not always true. In Artem's place, a smart person would have run out of the forest, meeting anyone he could and warning them about magicians. But our Artem did as you will soon see, not necessarily more wisely, but at least more bravely. He approached the stump, thought for a moment, scratched his messy head, and began to circle around it, repeating the spell he had heard from the old magician. To top it off, he faced the moon, made 3 turns around the copper-handled knife, and after the 3rd time he looked. There he stood on 4 legs, his snout extended forward, his clothes transformed into long, fluffy fur, and his legs stretched out like a shaggy tail dragging behind him like a broom. Surprised at this sudden change in his appearance and clothes, he tried to speak. But what do you think happened? Instead of a human voice, there was a wolf's howl. He tried to run, and another miracle occurred. His legs no longer tangled with each other. The new werewolf could not speak, but he had not lost the ability to reason, of course, as much as he usually reasoned in his human form. To be honest, I have never heard of werewolves with wolf fur becoming wiser than they were as humans. So, Artem stopped and thought about how to use his new form for his own convenience and enjoyment. A thought came to him, worthy of the head in which it was born. He remembered how often the village boys had mocked him. "Why not?" he thought. "No, I'll mock them. I'll go to the village in the morning and pounce on everyone. How scared will they be of me, those brave boys? But first, I'll take a nap. This fur will keep me warm and cozy, even on the damp grass." Said and done our Artem, or werewolf, burrowed into the hazel thicket, lay down, and fell into a deep sleep. Whether he slept much or little, I can't say for sure, but when he woke up, the sun was already quite high. He shook himself, looked at his new attire in the daylight, and found it so amusing that he burst into laughter. He wanted to giggle, but instead, an ironic, sharp wolf's howl came out of him, and poor Artem was scared by it himself. Once he recovered and realized he had been scared by his own laugh, he chuckled even more, and his howl became even louder and more piercing. There was nothing to be done. As much as it amused him, whether he liked it or not, he had to restrain himself to avoid bursting his eardrums. At that moment, he remembered his plan from the day before, to scare the village boys. He set off toward the village. On the way, he met peasants heading to their fields. When they saw the unusually large, brave wolf from afar, none of them suspected that it was the foolish Artem. They all thought it was the same werewolf, the old magician Ermolai. So each peasant crossed himself, covered his eyes with his hands, and muttered, "May it pass me by. May it pass me by." This only made Artem laugh even more, and his desire to go to the village grew stronger. Never before had anyone been so afraid of him. What joy! How would they react in the village? How would they all scream, "Wolf"? They would send their dogs after him, chase him with with sticks and pitchforks, and nothing would touch him, neither the clubs nor the iron, and even the dogs would fear him. What a laugh it would be! And indeed, the whole village rose against the gray beast. At first, those who encountered him ran away. The women quickly gathered their sheep and goats and locked them in the pens. Hiding themselves in the corners of their houses, everyone knew this was no ordinary wolf. But soon, some brave souls shouted across the village that it was time to deal with the old magician, and a crowd gathered, some with clubs, others with axes, some with the sticks they used to lock the gates. They surrounded the wolf, ready to pounce on him. At first he stood his ground, charging at one or another, bristling, baring his teeth, and snapping at them. But finally fear overcame him. He knew that due to his magic, they couldn't kill him, even if they broke his ribs from the beating, but they could strip his fur and tear off his tail. And then how would he face his strict father with a torn skin and missing pieces of his coat? Disaster! Indeed, no brave soul stepped forward to face him. They all shouted, howled from afar, but not one of them stepped forward. And the dogs could not bark either. They hid in their huts and didn't show their noses. Meanwhile, all the people stood in a circle, and he couldn't break through them. There was another problem, too. Our werewolf hadn't eaten since the previous evening, and his empty stomach protested loudly. What was he to do? And who could tell him if his father had already returned to the village, and whether he would find out about his mischief? What a fool he was! He had forgotten to see how his father had returned to his human form. Now poor Artem would either die of hunger or melt away in misery in his wolf skin. His 4 legs trembled, and he lay on the ground, curled up in a ball with his head between his front paws. The villagers wondered what to do with the werewolf, whether to bury him alive in a pit or tie him up and hand him over to the local authorities. Meanwhile, the rumor about the werewolf's cowardice had spread through the village, and the women found the courage to go out onto the streets. One young girl even approached the circle of villagers around the supposed wolf. This brave girl was Ekolina Timofeevna. She immediately understood what was going on, asked the villagers to make way, entered the circle, and spoke such wise words to them. "Good people, don't provoke the beast, since it seems, as we can see, it is waiting for the villagers' verdict. If you kill the werewolf, you won't gain much, but you'll have a lot of trouble. I've heard that in the courts, even werewolves, if they have money, fare better than honest poor people. Listen to my advice. Go home safely and soundly, and I'll take this werewolf to my house, and I give you my word, it will be better for you that way." All the villagers perked up to listen to her, and wondered how clever this young beauty was. None of them could come up with anything smarter than what she had said. They listened to her, and each went on their way. Then she untied her colorful ribbon from her braid and stepped towards the werewolf, who, at that moment, shifted and stretched his neck as if he knew what the girl was planning. Ekolina Timofeevna tied the ribbon around his neck and led him to her house. By the werewolf's cowardice and foolishness, she immediately figured out who he was. She put him in her empty pantry, fed him whatever she found, and laid fresh straw in the corner. Then she scolded him for his reckless carelessness. Poor Artem, with his wolfish muzzle twisted in a pitiful and somewhat comical way, shed tears from his murky red eyes, and would probably have cried like a little child if he weren't afraid he would howl like a wolf and alert the whole village again. The girl locked him in the pantry and left him there to rest and grieve as much as he wanted. In the evening, Ekolina Timofeevna went to see the old Ermola, threw herself at his feet, told him everything she knew, and took all the blame upon herself. The old magician already knew everything, and he was very angry with Artem, repeating, "He deserves it, let him walk in his wolf skin." But the pleas and tears of the sorrowful beauty were so eloquent and convincing that even the old man almost felt moved. He put his well-known knife with the copper handle in his belt, took a tin lantern under his coat, and set off with the girl. Once he entered the pantry, he first pulled on the ears of the supposed wolf, who, during this time, was making grimaces that neither beast nor human could make, howling so loudly and piercingly that he nearly deafened both the old man and the girl, as well as the entire village. After punishing him in this way, the magician walked around the werewolf 3 times, muttering something under his breath. Then he made him lie on his stomach and stretch all 4 of his paws, and with his magical knife he slashed his skin crosswise, from neck to tail and across his back. The torn skin fell onto the straw, and at that moment Artem jumped up, mouth open, with a childish look and very, very red ears. After shaking himself off and rubbing his shoulders against the wall, he fell at the feet of his foster father and, sobbing, begged in a pitiful voice, "I'm guilty, father! Forgive me!" The old man scolded him in a fatherly manner and forgave him. Akolina Timofeevna was greatly admired by the old Ermola. He noticed that she was naturally clever, and he thought it would be better to take such a wise woman for his adopted son, who, after his father's death, would at least not squander what the old miser had gathered at such a high cost, his sinfully accumulated gold coins and rubles. In short, after 3 days, the whole village was feasting at the wedding of Artem Ermolaevich and Akolina Timofeevna. And although everyone knew that old Ermola was an evil magician, few refused his intoxicating beer and sweet mead. Shortly afterward, Ermola sold his house and fields and, together with the newlyweds, his adopted son, and his daughter-in-law, moved to a distant village where no one had heard of him. It is said that he spent the last years of his life there peacefully and honorably, doing good deeds and helping the poor, which is why he died quietly and was buried in the cemetery as a good man, alongside all the other deceased villagers. It is also said that Artem, after living several years with his wise and sensible wife, became half as foolish as he had been before, and even in his mature years he was elected as the village mayor. What he did and how he was, I don't know, but in the village everyone agreed that Akolina Timofeevna was the smartest of all the clever brides.